The Shadow Scythe is one of the best weapons in solo leveling Arise, as it can deal insane damage, and with it actually being a free weapon, it makes it a must build, but there are also other things like runes and also weapons that can make the Scythe even better. But first, let's actually start off with why you should actually go ahead and build this weapon. And of course, to start with, even though it is a free weapon, it's of the SSR rarity, which means its main stats or basic stats are going to be really high. And then the best thing about this weapon is just its main passive, which basically says when using Essence Harvest, which is its just regular skill, you'll be able to consume 5% of your current HP, and then basically in return you'll be able to increase your skill damage by 100%, which is just essentially doubling it. And this is going to be insane, as the damage multipliers of Essence Harvest are already high enough, as you can go from 1454% all the way to 2224% of Jinwoo's attack, and the fact that you can pretty much double the damage this skill deals means this is just going to do an immense amount of damage. And if you didn't actually know, you can also get one dupe of this weapon completely for free, which means you're going to get some extra precision, but also the very first passive of its dupes. And essentially its first dupe passive will say if the user's current HP is below 70%, the Edge of Darkness effect will be applied. And essentially what this will do, it will just give you a flat 25% critical hit rate increase, which is amazing because obviously the more you crit, the more damage you'll deal. It will work very nicely with the Expert gear set, as well as also things like the Berserker gear set, which also can give you up to a 30% damage increase if you do have 70% or less HP currently, which is going to be a really good amount of synergy you can have with that weapon just in general. And then the second dupe will increase its own dark damage by 10%, so if you have it, it's just another free 10% damage with this weapon, so which will obviously always stack and basically just compound a ton with all of its other damage bonuses. And then for the third dupe, it's just sort of like a quality of life thing and basically reduces the risk that the Shadow Scythe actually gives you, as with the Scythe consuming up to 5% of your current HP in order to increase your skill damage, it does mean it gives a bit of risk but also a ton of reward. As if you're facing off against enemies that are much stronger than you, then you're going to be taking a lot more damage, which then makes this weapon a little bit risky to use, especially if you're not as good at dodging as some other people might be, which is when again the third dupe then does actually come in, as pretty much what it does, but it basically says whenever the user's current HP is at 60% or below, you can recover 0.4% of your own current HP every time the damage from the Shadow Scythe skill actually hits. And if you didn't know, when also you hold down Essence Harvest, it can hit a ton of times, as you can see right there, which means you're going to heal quite a lot. And then as always, the fourth dupe of every weapon will decrease the skill cooldown, although with it being an SSR weapon, you'll be able to decrease the cooldown of Essence Harvest, being its skill again, by 20% as opposed to the normal 15% of SR weapons, so it's a nice buff right there. And then the final dupe is another pretty risky dupe, but it also gives you a ton of reward, as pretty much what it will do, it will increase the damage that you take by 15%, but will also increase your attack by 15% as well, which overall is a massive increase. However, obviously, with that on top of consuming your own HP, it does make this weapon a pretty big risk, but it just offers you so much of a reward that it's always worth taking that risk. And then also for weapons like the Shadow Scythe, it's really important that you level up the correct skills, as each weapon will have 3 skills in total that you can level up by spending materials. So which one of these 3 are going to be the best ones for you to level up? And to start things off, of course, is going to be the skill Essence Harvest. This is an amazing skill because it has a ton of damage and is what this weapon is all about, is just its skill, which for me definitely makes it the best skill for you to level up to start off with. And then when it comes to Shadow Scythe's basic and also core attacks, you pretty much just want to level them up equally, as they're both just as important as each other. But if I had to choose one which you should level up over the other, I would choose the core attack more, as that's where you can get more burst damage. All I would say just about this weapon in general is just make sure you focus on Essence Harvest, as this is where all of your damage comes from. But of course, when you play as Jinwoo, you actually have the ability to use 2 different weapons, which means we've then got to find some of the best pairings for the Shadow Scythe weapon. And to start things off, the 2 best weapons that you want to pair up with the Shadow Scythe are going to be the Moon Shadow, as well as also the Demonic Plum Flower Sword. But let's start off with the Moon Shadow, and the main thing about the Moon Shadow that you want to look for is the Lunar Eclipse debuff that it does apply. As pretty much with this debuff, you can increase the damage that an enemy will take by 10%, but also you can increase your own dark damage by 10%, and this will last for 3 seconds, which means you can basically apply this and then use your Shadow Scythe Essence Harvest skill to then get a bunch of benefits of damage through the Lunar Eclipse debuff. And if you're one of the fortunate ones who have at least 1 dupe into the Moon Shadow, you'll actually be able to stack the Lunar Eclipse debuff up to 3 times, but also you'll be able to increase the amount of damage taken that an enemy will take, and also the amount of dark damage that you'll do as well, as this goes from 10% all the way to 15% for both of the multipliers. And because you can stack it up to 3 times now, it does mean you can get up to a 45% damage increase, as well as also dark damage increase, which overall makes it like one of the most perfect support weapons for any dark weapon in the game, which also makes it a pretty much must build if you do have have another dark weapon. And then as for the Plumflower Sword, this thing is just a monster of a weapon. It's definitely the best weapon in the game still by far, which is kind of crazy. And the main things to note about the demonic Plumflower Sword is mainly just even at 0 dupes, you don't really need it at any dupes, to be honest, because at 0 dupes you can apply the Plumflower effect, which is basically a permanent 12% crit damage increase that can be stacked up to 3 different times, which essentially means you can get up to a 36% permanent crit damage increase. And because you can actually buff your own crit rate with the Shadow Scythe, it does mean you're going to be able to stack a ton of crit stats with your Sung Jin Woo. And then also this weapon can also apply the Full Bloom effect, which basically occurs when you dash and then use your skill at the same time with this weapon. And pretty much what this will do, it'll increase the usage speed of your skill by 20%. But the main important thing for it is the fact that you get a 4% attack increase as well as a 4% crit rate increase. And then because things like the Moon Shadow and the Plumflower Sword are SSR rarity weapons, it does mean not everyone's actually going to have them, which means we got to talk about some of the best free-to-play weapons that you can actually pair with the Shadow Scythe. And the first option, which I think would actually be pretty good with the Scythe, is going to be the Night Killer, as pretty much you can increase your defense penetration all the way up to 24% for 20 seconds whenever using your skill, which can obviously benefit the damage of the Shadow Scythe skill damage. But it's really the third dupe where this weapon becomes really good, because basically whenever you use your skill with Night Killer, you'll be able to apply a shield, which is equal to 15% of your own max HP. And then the reason why this is actually good is because obviously whenever you use a shield, you pretty much have super armor, which means you can't be interrupted whenever you take damage. And because the duration of Essence Harvest, being the Shadow Scythe skill, is a pretty long duration, it does mean it can be quite easy for you to actually get interrupted during that. So when you have this shield, it's going to make it a lot easier to not get interrupted by attacks. And a weapon that will do a pretty similar thing and also offer just a bunch of damage increases is going to be the Radiru family's longbow, as you can stack up to an 80% damage increase just through using this weapon's skill. And you also have the ability to apply stuns to your targets as well, which will help you buy time to get your skills back a lot faster without worrying about taking damage. And the same thing can be applied to the Frostbite Falchion, as this also has some stuns with freezing. And if you want to run a mono dark weapon sort of build, then you can use Black Hawk, as it's the only other free-to-play dark weapon in the game, as pretty much also on the second dupe you can increase your dark damage even further by 8%. And then as I mentioned in the intro, there's a lot of different runes that you can use with the Shadow Scythe to make it better. And there's lots of different things that are going to be really good for it, and one of the best things for it is going to be the free-to-play Earth Shock, which you just get by logging in or did for an event, as this will be able to increase your critical hit damage by 30%, which will work very nicely with the Shadow Scythe's passive to be able to increase your crit rate as well, which is always amazing. And the same also applies to Pummel, which is the light version of Multi-Strike, as pretty much this gives you super armor as well as the ability to use this skill twice, which is amazing, and will also increase your critical hit rate by 4% for 8 seconds. And because you can use this skill twice, you'll be able to pretty much double that. And then if you plan on using Moon Shadow with the Shadow Scythe, then you can also utilize a lot of dark elemental skills with things like Stroke of Lightning, which is the dark version of Mutilate, which is amazing. And then also the dark version of Vertical Arts, I think, is also another amazing skill that you can use with the Shadow Scythe, as not only can you create a shield which is equal to 20% of Jinwoo's HP for 2 seconds, but you can also have a counterattack that then stuns, which will last up for 3 seconds, which will give you a ton of time to use your Shadow Scythe Essence Harvest skill. And the same thing also applies to Countering Break, which is the dark version of Crushing Blow, which does the exact same thing pretty much, giving you a shield as well as the ability to counterattack, and can also stun for 3 seconds, but it also offers a huge amount of break damage as well on a 10-second cooldown, which is amazing. So there you have it. The Shadow Scythe is an amazing weapon, and the fact that it's a completely free weapon just makes it even better, and a 100% must-build weapon for every player in solo leveling Arise. And most importantly, if you did enjoy this video or you found it useful just in general, then don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps me a ton, and click the link down below to support me as a creator for the game, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!